The wind howled through the cracks of the old farmhouse as the last of the sun vanished behind the hills. Inside, the rooms stood silent and cold, each one emptier than the last. Down a forgotten hallway, in the farthest corner, 11-year-old Ava lay curled beneath a thin blanket on a mattress on the floor. 6 months had passed since the car crash that took her mother's life, and left Ava paralyzed from the waist down. Everything had changed after that. Her mother had been her warmth, her lullaby at bedtime, her entire world. In her place now was Raymond Carver, Ray, the man her mother once trusted, but who now treated Ava like a burden too heavy to bear. He never spoke her name gently. He never looked at her without contempt. Ava's room had no wheelchair. She crawled to reach the portable toilet in the corner. There were no toys, no television. Meals were shoved in on a tray by Ray's boot. The only thing she still had from before was a tiny music box her mother had given her, but its winder was broken. It no longer sang. That night Ray came home drunk. His boots pounded unevenly through the hallway, his voice slurring curses into the air. Then, silence. The back door creaked open. Minutes later, he returned, dragging a thick iron chain. "Time to clean the slate," he muttered. Brutus had arrived 2 weeks earlier, a massive German shepherd, scarred and snarling, with a reputation carved into his hide. Ray claimed the dog was ex-military, discharged after an incident that left a man dead. He'd adopted Brutus from a shady private kennel, grinning like he'd just solved a problem. Brutus lived outside, chained to a wooden cage by the barn. Ray fed him on a strict schedule and never touched him without gloves. To the neighbors, Ray had simply said, "This dog's exactly what this house needs." That night, Ray unlatched the back door and stormed toward Ava's room. She looked up, alarmed, as he grabbed her by the arm. She screamed, but no one heard. He dragged her outside, through the cold night, across the yard to the old equipment shed. It smelled of rust and damp earth. In the corner, Brutus waited, unchained, unmoving. His eyes gleamed in the darkness. Ray tossed Ava to the floor. "There," he sneered. "Let nature take its course." He slammed the door shut. Ava sobbed, scrambling backward, her hands scraping against the floor, her legs limp and useless. Brutus rose to his full height, teeth bared. A deep growl rumbled from his chest. Outside, Ray paused, listening. Then, smiling to himself, he walked away, the sound of his truck fading into the distance. Inside the shed, silence settled, except for the low growl of the beast just feet away. Ava curled herself tighter on the cold floor, heart pounding. Brutus stood motionless, head low, body tense, but not advancing. Seconds stretched like hours. She buried her face in her arms and wept, not just from fear, but from exhaustion. Her thin frame trembled with each sob. She couldn't move her legs, but she tried to inch away, pushing herself back with her hands, her elbows scraping raw against the concrete. Brutus didn't follow. Instead, the massive dog slowly lowered himself to the ground. He rested his chin on his paws, but kept his eyes on her. They weren't wild. They weren't angry. They were watching. A sudden rumble broke the silence. Ava froze. It was her stomach, the hollow ache of hunger speaking up at last. She glanced at the dog, wide-eyed. Brutus lifted his head, his ears twitched. Then, in the quiet, his own stomach answered, a deep, groaning rumble from within the beast. For a long moment, neither moved. Then Ava, her eyes still red from crying, let out the smallest laugh. It escaped like something uninvited, a sound she hadn't made in weeks. A cracked, hoarse laugh. "We're both hungry," she whispered. To her shock, Brutus's jaw parted slightly. He didn't growl. His tongue poked out, curling at the edge of his mouth. He looked relaxed, as if, in that brief moment, he was sharing the joke. "You look like you're smiling," she murmured. He didn't move, but he was no longer a threat. There was something behind his eyes now, something she couldn't explain, but felt, a stillness, a sadness, maybe recognition. Slowly, Brutus began to crawl forward. Ava's breath caught, her hand clenched around the only thing she'd managed to bring with her, her mother's old plastic ladybug keychain. It was cracked, worn, It no longer lit up. After the crash, Ava had begged to keep it. Now it was all she had. Brutus stopped inches away. He sniffed once, long and low, then sat. He lowered his head and gently nudged her hand. Then he licked her knuckles. She didn't move, couldn't. But her heart didn't race. Her fear was no longer paralyzing. "My mom used to say," she whispered, "a good dog always looks into your eyes before doing anything. That's how you know." Brutus lifted his head, his gaze meeting hers. He was looking, truly looking. Then, as if called by something unseen, Brutus turned away. He walked across the shed to the far wall, sniffing at the baseboards. He began pawing at the corner. Ava turned her head to see. Behind some stacked crates, a panel of rotted wood gave slightly under his weight. Brutus began to claw harder. "You're trying to get out," she whispered. She dragged herself toward him, biting her lip against the pain as she pulled closer. Her fingers found the edge of the panel. She yanked, twisted, pulling at the old nails until they bent and broke. Splinters tore her palms, but she didn't stop. Brutus pushed again and again, until finally the board cracked. A hole opened, just large enough. With one last look at Ava, Brutus pushed through and disappeared into the night. Brutus hit the dirt path like a shadow on fire. His paws pounded the gravel. Each stride wasn't just instinct, it was a promise. The countryside slept beneath a slivered moon, the kind of silence that could swallow cries for help. But Brutus ran like the wind itself carried his urgency. 2 miles down the road, a delivery van had stopped near a side barn. Its headlights cut through the fog, illuminating a filthy German shepherd barreling toward them. The driver stepped out, startled. "Whoa! Hey, back off!" Brutus didn't flinch. He skidded to a halt, barking, sharp, insistent. He leapt not with aggression, but desperation. From a porch nearby, a woman in her 60s called out, "Is that a shepherd? Looks like it's been through a war." The driver shook his head. "Crazy mutt just jumped into my truck." But then a boy, maybe 10, stepped from behind the woman's skirt. Wide brown eyes, striped pajamas, rubber boots. "Wait," the boy said, watching the dog. "I think he's trying to say something." "Jaime, get back," the woman warned. But Jaime didn't move. He watched the dog, tilted his head, then turned to the others. "Follow him," he said. "He's not trying to scare us. He wants us to follow." Brutus barked once, then turned and bolted down the road. Jaime took the first step. Within minutes, Jaime, the woman, the delivery driver, and a nearby farmhand were packed into the van, trailing the strange dog. Brutus led them without fear, only purpose. At the edge of the property, he stopped at the shed. He snarled low, body pressed against the door. He pawed violently, then let out a piercing bark. "Something's in there," Jaime whispered. "Hello?" the woman called out. "Anyone inside?" No answer. Then a faint thump. The driver grabbed a crowbar. The lock gave after a struggle. The door creaked open. And there, crumpled on the ground, lay Ava, pale, smudged with grime, her arms curled tightly around her chest. In one hand she still clutched the plastic ladybug. "Oh, dear God!" the woman gasped, rushing in with a blanket. "She's ice cold." Jaime stepped forward, eyes wide. "She's alive," the driver murmured. Just then, headlights swept the driveway. Ray had returned. He stumbled from the truck, reeking of alcohol, and froze at the sight of the van, the strangers, and Brutus. "What the hell?" Before he could finish, Brutus let out a snarl unlike any they'd ever heard. He charged, stopping inches from Ray, hackles raised, teeth bared, planting himself squarely between Ray and Ava. "Back!" the driver shouted. But the woman raised a hand. "Number, he's protecting her." Ray chuckled nervously. "I don't know what you think you saw. That girl, she gets into things. Always been a handful, that one." But his words faltered. His face went pale. When the police arrived, summoned by the farmhand, Brutus refused to move from Ava's side. The officers took one look at the girl, the dog, the crowd of witnesses. And Ray was handcuffed on the spot, charged with child endangerment, neglect, and attempted harm to a minor. Brutus never growled again that night. He simply sat beside Ava as the ambulance arrived, his breathing calm, his eyes watchful, never leaving her. Photos of the large German shepherd sitting beside the hospital bed of a frail, sleeping girl circulated across television networks and social media. But the image that gripped the nation the most was not one of violence or drama, it was one of loyalty. Ava woke in the hospital 2 days after being rescued. Her body was weak, her skin still pale. An intravenous line ran from her arm like a thread tethering her to the world. Nurses leaned over her, gently murmuring reassurance, but she said nothing until she opened her mouth and whispered a single word: Brutus. A social worker immediately contacted the shelter where the dog had been taken. An hour later, Brutus was escorted into the pediatric recovery wing by a police officer, one who had seen it all. The dog's steps were careful, deliberate, as if he understood the gravity of the space. The moment he entered Ava's room, her eyes lit up, for the first time since the accident. She reached out, her voice cracking as she said again, louder this time, Brutus. Brutus pressed his massive head into her chest, and she threw her arms around his neck. She didn't cry softly, she sobbed, tears that sounded like the breaking of walls and the mending of something deeper. Nurses turned away with misted eyes. A therapist in the corner simply nodded. She had witnessed breakthroughs before, but never one quite like this. Over the next few days, Brutus visited Ava regularly. Doctors noticed her vitals improve whenever he was present. She ate more, slept better. But beyond her recovery, Brutus's story was gaining attention for another reason. A team of animal welfare investigators began to dig into his past. What they uncovered was a history filled with pain, fear, and neglect. Brutus had once been a military working dog assigned to explosive detection in a conflict zone overseas. After a mission failed, not due to his error, but a command oversight, he was pulled from active duty. When his unit disbanded, no one claimed him. That's when Rye stepped in. Records showed Rye had applied to adopt a retired military dog, but it wasn't out of kindness. It was for control. He attempted to retrain Brutus for private protection work using cruel methods, starvation, isolation, punishment for perceived disobedience. The dog that emerged wasn't violent by nature. He was reactive and terrified. He never turned on anyone, one investigator said. He just stopped trusting. Until Ava. She was the first person who hadn't yelled, hit, or restrained him. She hadn't expected him to be good. She had simply survived beside him, and that had been enough. With Rye in custody and his property seized for investigation, Ava was placed in the care of a privately funded rehabilitation center for children who had survived trauma. The program, backed by an animal welfare foundation, emphasized healing through the presence of therapy animals. Ava was allowed to choose her companion. She chose Brutus. The dog who had once been locked in a shed with her now slept beside her bed at night, stood guard during therapy sessions, and helped other children learn to trust again. Brutus remained calm around wheelchairs, crutches, even loud noises. His presence said what no adult could: "You are safe now." The children called him the door dog, the one who stood between them and what had once hurt them, but Ava called him something simpler: "My friend," and Brutus, tail thumping softly on the floor each time she entered the room, never left her side. 1 year later, the city park overflowed with people. Parents, children, journalists, police officers, and volunteers gathered beneath a banner that read, "Honoring Brutus, Guardian Dog." At the center of the event stood a modest stage. A young girl made her way forward slowly with the aid of a walker. Ava had grown stronger. Her legs still trembled with every step, but she no longer sat hidden in shadows. Her hair was tied back with a pale blue ribbon. A soft breeze brushed her cheeks as she reached the microphone. Brutus walked beside her, calm and steady, like a living statue of devotion. The crowd fell silent. She looked out at the sea of faces, some tearful, some smiling, all waiting, and then turned to Brutus, who sat beside her like he had in that hospital room, in that courtroom, in that long, dark night. She placed her hand on his broad head and began to speak. He was never the monster in the cage, Ava said, her voice quiet but clear. He was locked up, just like me. We saved each other. There was no need to explain further. Applause broke across the crowd, not thunderous, but warm. People clapped with hands pressed over their hearts. Some wept openly. Nearby, reporters captured every word. That day, a new initiative was born. Second Chance Paws, a nonprofit organization, was officially launched with a mission to rescue and retrain dogs once labeled dangerous and pair them with children who had experienced trauma. The idea was simple, yet radical, healing those who had been broken by fear. Brutus became the face of the organization. His image, gentle, proud, appeared on the logo above the name. And Ava, despite her age, was named the youngest ambassador in the organization's history. She stood not as a symbol of survival, but of transformation, one news outlet wrote. He gave me more than safety, Ava told a local news crew. He gave me a reason to try again. As the ceremony drew to a close, music played and families lingered. Many approached Ava to thank her, to meet Brutus, or to share their own stories. But after the crowds thinned and the cameras packed up, Ava stepped away quietly, with Brutus. She walked slowly across the field to a small hill beneath a cluster of trees. There, she lowered herself onto the soft grass. Her walker stood beside her like a sentinel. Brutus curled beside her, his head resting on her thigh. Her fingers traced through his fur absently, not needing words. The sun dipped lower in the sky. A little boy, no older than 6, pale and withdrawn, stood hesitantly a few yards away, clutching a blanket. He had recently been brought into the hospital support program. Silent, scared, since the night his home caught fire. He watched Ava and the dog from behind the sleeve of his coat. Ava noticed him and smiled. She nodded slowly. Brutus lifted his head, no command, no gesture. The dog rose, turned, and approached the boy, slow and careful. He stopped a foot away, lay down, and waited. The boy knelt. After a long pause, he reached out a hand. Brutus didn't move. He just waited. And in that stillness, where no one spoke, where healing did not need to shout, something passed between the boy and the dog. Something fragile, precious, impossibly real. It wasn't a miracle. It was something better. It was trust. And it began once again with a moment of silence, beside a girl who had once shared a cage with fear and a dog who chose to protect rather than destroy. Together, they had rewritten what it meant to be saved. Thank you for joining us on this unforgettable journey of courage, compassion, and second chances. Ava and Brutus reminded us all that sometimes healing doesn't come with noise. It comes with quiet understanding, with steady presence, and with love that asks for nothing in return. If this story touched your heart, imagine the stories still waiting to be told. At PAWPRINTS Stories, we bring you the most powerful, true, and inspired tales of animals and the humans whose lives they change forever. Subscribe now to never miss a moment that might just change your day or your heart. Until next time, remember, every paw print has a story. Let us keep listening. Let us keep believing.